Courage is not the absence of fear, as we said, but the ability to move forward in the face of that fear. And so that means that courage is ability and ability is strength. So we have to increase ability, which means increase our strength. Focus on building strength. As I said in the last episode, the best way to do that is to master your present. That's the kind of drudgery, daily weightlifting that you need to be doing, which is just lifting the heavy things of life, getting everything done, keeping everything organized, and building up that personal strength. And I would extend it then even into other areas, like actual physical training, challenging yourself to do things you could not do before. Not something you're afraid of, but maybe something you're unfamiliar with. Okay, like, again, getting into the gym and thinking you'd never be able to deadlift 200 pounds, and then you deadlift 200 pounds. Never believing you'd be able to lose that 30 pounds, but you lost that 30 pounds. Never believing you'd be able to do something else, and yet you do it. It doesn't have a relation to your fear. And you're not doing it because of that fear. You're doing it because it's building your strength. You're increasing the way that you see yourself. Hence why I'm calling this realizing your giant within. So finally we come down to the mental battle that has to be won, and that begins with the simple realization that to conquer giants, you yourself have to become a giant. Isn't that true? If you're going to conquer a giant, man, you yourself have to become a giant. Because if giants are exaggerated versions of something real, well, then it's time to exaggerate who you are. Isn't that good? If giants are exaggerated versions of something real, then it's time to exaggerate who you are. Because again, as we said, fear is irrational. It's an exaggerated interpretation of something real. So you need to do that for yourself. You've got to start realizing that you too are a giant. It means changing what you think about, what you visualize, what you say about yourself. Changing these things to realize that giant within. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with I'm going to share with you a couple of Bible stories. I think they give great examples of this. You don't have to be a religious person, but I think you'll still get tremendous principles out of this. You remember the story of David and Goliath. David and Goliath is a powerful, probably the most famous giant story, right? Probably the most famous that we've ever heard of, where this little guy defeats this big guy, and he did it with these stones. He used his little leather, slingshot, and landed a stone right in the center of the giant's head and knocked him down and killed him and then chopped his head off. Now, for days, the entire army of Israel was cowering in the mountaintops while every day Goliath threatened them and dared any one of the warriors of Israel to come down and fight him. Nobody would, because they were all afraid of a giant, until little David shows up to bring lunch for his brothers. David wasn't even a soldier. His brothers were, so he comes and brings them lunch, and then he hears the mocking of Goliath. And so David goes to the king and says, is anybody going to go down and challenge him? I'll challenge him. And so David goes down and does it. But it had to do with how David saw himself. Why? Because the king, when David suggested, this little guy suggested that he was going to face this giant, the king said, how are you going to do this? And David said this. David said, there was a time when a lion attacked my father's sheepfold, and I fought them off. There was a time when a bear attacked my father's sheepfold, and I fought the bear off. And this giant will be no different. Right? So David's past victories are what helped to create that giant image within him. And so that's what gave him the ability then to face this giant. Taking the divine aspects out of it, that's what was happening in David. David reasoned, I've defeated the bear, I defeated the lion, I'll defeat the giant too. Simple reasoning, but it's the way he saw himself. There was another time when the children of Israel had come out of the wilderness period, a wilderness journey of about 40 years, and they were going into what they called the promised land. And so there were enemies in the land that had to be conquered. And so they were coming up to the city of Jericho. And they were afraid of the people who inhabited Jericho. So they sent spies, 12 spies, to go and check out this city of Jericho and come back and report to see if they could fight them. Now, 10 of the spies were crawling around in the grass and got close to the city. They saw the Jericho people, got scared, and came back. Now, when they came back, they reported, they said, well, we were crawling around in the grass and we looked at the Jericho people and we were as grasshoppers in their sight. That's how they described it. They said, we were as grasshoppers in their sight. Now, I said there was 12 spies, but there was 2 others, Joshua and Caleb, who happened to be a little bit older. Well, they're in the trees. These 2 other spies are in the trees, and they're looking down at the very same people of Jericho. They come back with a different story, and they say, we're well able to take the land. A completely different report. 10 of them crawling around in the grass. They said, we are as grasshoppers. Those 2 hanging out in the trees, they said, we're well able to take the land. Which vantage point are you looking at, right? If you're crawling around on the ground, everything to you is like you're looking as a grasshopper. Everything to you is giant. But when you're looking from the vantage point of the trees, you don't take into consideration like the 2 spies in the trees were older. So it has nothing to do with age and nothing to do with that. It has to do with the heart. It has to do with the strength of the core. It has to do with who you are and what vantage point you're looking at. It's all about vantage point. And how do you then see yourself? Because if your vantage point is better, then you're going to see yourself better. You're not going to focus so much on the size of your enemy. You're focusing on the size of your own heart. You're focusing on the size of your own strength. You're focusing on the size of your own ability. You're not going to be defeated then by this grasshopper complex. You're going to have a giant rise up within you. And pretty soon those giants don't mean anything. You defeated the lion, you defeated the bear, you're going to defeat whatever it is that faces you too. And your future is yours to possess. Can you dig it? I hope you can.